Jamaica, Jamaica, land we love. Thank you. Please be seated. And as we sit, may I please ask us to invite Right Reverend Garth Minot, Bishop of Kingston, to offer prayer.
Let us pray. Father God, good leaders and people come from you. This nation needs leaders and people with discerning hearts and wise minds. We come to you today asking you to make us wise, that together we will lead this nation in the right direction. Remove wrong people that are corrupt and living against your word from influential positions. Let our leaders be people who honor your holy name, for it is only from you that they get true wisdom. Gracious God, we come because the people of this nation and everything in it belong to you. We are not here by accident. You are the one who sets us in this nation at this time for the glory of your name. But gracious God, people in this country are turning against you and against each other. We no longer live as sisters and brothers. We turn against each other, brother against brother, child against parent, parent against children. But your word says that if we humble ourselves and turn from our wicked ways, you will heal our land. Remove all bitterness and resentment from our hearts. Help us to live together as sisters and brothers. So as we come to deliberate on the present and the future of our nation, we pray, O God, you will guide our discussions, deliberations, enable our debate, and through passion and vigor, we pray that you will enable us to contend with each other, but at the same time recognize that we are building a nation guided by your Holy Spirit. So bless and guide all that we say and do as we pray in the name of Jesus Christ the Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop. We will invite at this time the President of the Jamaica Council of Churches, Most Reverend Kenneth Richards, to express welcome.
Thank you, Mr. General Secretary of the Jamaica Council of Churches. Good evening, my brothers and sisters. Good evening, friends, those present here and those are online. Jamaica is at a stage, a seminal stage in its development, its advancement. And so in its 60th year, we are contemplating the reforming of our Constitution. It's important that those of us who are in positions of responsibility ensure that this conversation is widespread and is carried out in such a way so as to awaken a sensitivity and an awareness among every citizen of this nation that they have a stake in the reform of the Constitution to ensure that it is a Jamaican Constitution. We need to ensure that conversation not only take place at the what can be described as the elite level, those with academic prowess, but that we also take it to the people with common sense. And for the most part, such persons may think that this conversation and the reforming of the Constitution must be an exercise that is performed by academia and by legal minds. But indeed, a constitution is a protective instrument for every citizen of a nation. And for this reason, those of us in this position of responsibility must make sure that we engage the Jamaican populace. So even as the Jamaica Council of Churches this evening begins a conversation at this level, and we hope to take it also to other areas of our nation, we must ensure that indeed we take it to the grassroots level. If we fail to do so, we will continue to promote the colonization, the colonial approach with respect to the organization and the governance of our people, where our people will continue to think that it's only the big man must do things for us and not recognize that they have a stake and a role to play. And so indeed, if we are serious about the conversation that we are beginning here, those of us in the Jamaica Council of Churches and the other stakeholders here must find means and strategies by which we take it to the inner city, to rural areas, to the far-flung areas, to people on the margin, to allow them to be part of the conversation. It is in this way that we'll truly ensure that the people of this nation recognize that they have a civic responsibility and a stake in the advancement of the nation. And then those who are charged with governance, that indeed they must operate in a way as to safeguard the dignity and the integrity of each man, each woman, each boy, and each girl. And that indeed will allow our people to rise to a sensitivity and awareness with respect to how to engage each other on a social level with respect for due process, for principles and precepts that will safeguard the flourishing and enable the flourishing and the welfare of each citizen of this nation. So we hope that this conversation will be fruitful, but indeed that we'll not be satisfied in allowing this conversation to take place among us, but we engage other persons in our nation. So with these few words, I offer welcome to you all. I express gratitude to Reverend Glenroy Layla, who's the host pastor here, and then all the executives of the Jamaica Council of Churches present, our panel, who will be informing and enlightening us with respect to the details, the purpose of law in governance, etc., so that indeed we can set that platform that subsequent to our meeting here today, we can start engaging what we may describe as the little man and the little woman of our nation, so that they recognize it's not just about the elite and the big people and the academia, but they also have a stake in reforming the Constitution for their benefit now and for the welfare of our nation in the future. So welcome, and thank you for being present.
Yes, I think the President could do with an applause. Thank you. Thank you, President. I'd like now to introduce our moderator for tonight's encounter. He has been known for his intellect, his acumen, his skills with communication, and many other things. He is the former General Secretary of the Jamaica Baptist Union, a post he occupied for 5 terms, which is a testimony itself of the regard with which he was held in his communion. He presently pastors the historic Philippo Baptist Church in Spanish Town, St. Catherine, the old capital, where he is already making a significant impact. Sisters and brothers, both here in this sanctuary and online, let us welcome Reverend Carl Baldwin Johnson.
Thank you, Newton, and greetings, everybody. My task here this evening is both simple and hard. It is simple in that they have succeeded to muzzle me by offering me this task of moderating, which is not to essay my views, but to ensure that the proceedings flow according to plan. They summoned me, the planners, to a meeting yesterday and placed me under strict orders. And so anything I do, don't blame me. I'm a man acting under orders. That's the simple part. The hard part is we have a glittering array of powerhouses that will speak to us this evening. They have been given 7 minutes. I do not know how they are going to obey that 7 minutes. My task is to ensure that by any means necessary, I keep them to the 7 minutes. That's the hard part. I'm also advised that I am to ensure that this gathering does not descend into more heat than light. That is to say, we want it to be passionate, but be passionate with a purpose. You can't say everything this evening. And so we are going to ask you, because we expect rich and robust engagement in this first conversation this evening. As you can see, any talk about the conversation is not one which will force the police to block off roads in Arfitry. You realize that? It is not like the event of a few days ago where they had to reroute traffic. The Constitution is not a crowd puller. Not a crowd puller. And yet, we don't want to be numbered only among the choir here this evening. One of the hopes of the council is that we will contribute to a groundswell of interest into a process which goes to the very heart of our self-understanding. Many persons have gone ahead of us wanting to see this moment. We are alive, and we are able now to participate in a process. Elsewhere, you would say time come. But time come doesn't mean we mustn't do it right. The time has come for us, yes, to start intentionally on a route, but we have to make sure that this process is informed and guided by an agreed framework. And I think this conversation, among others, must assist us in deciding what are those important things that must inform this framework, this process. What are those things? And I don't want to begin to become a presenter, but I think we can already sense what some of those things are. And I am just praying and hoping that this will not be a talk shop. They gave me the outcomes that they would like. My outcome that I want is that Jamaicans of all levels will wake up and take charge of our common future together. Don't leave it. Don't leave it to a select few. Let us rise up in Sam Sharp style and take charge of our common destiny. There are 5 presenters, and thankfully, among them, we have chosen a youth. And so how we are going to proceed this evening is that we are going to invite the youth among us to come and share some perspectives on this process from that vantage point. She is Christina Howell, and perhaps the only thing wrong about Christina this evening, given the debates I've been hearing, is that she's an attorney at law. And, you know, they have been saying, we have enough of them. That's what they say, not me. I did not say that. I'm just repeating what they said, that we have enough of them. But she won't speak from the legal perspective. She will bring her views as a young person, a Jamaican, who, to the best of my knowledge, has no plan B. Plan A, B, C for her is Jamaica. And she will speak from that perspective. I ask you to receive her with a warm applause.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My plan A, B, and C is certainly Jamaica, Jamaica, land we love. And this evening, I will be giving a statement from the youth standpoint for active youth engagement in this process of constitutional reform. And I will start this way. All across Jamaica, young people possess dreams, ambition, skills, experience, and the potential to develop themselves, their communities, Jamaica, and even the world. Geographical boundaries do not exist in our minds. We see technology as our great asset, perhaps our greatest asset, not a threat. We think differently, we engage uniquely, we are passionate, we are enthusiastic, we are driven, we are bold, and we are bright. So with all these qualities embodied in our youth, the case is even more convincing that we should be included in the conversation, front and center, in matters relating to our development and future existence in this country. And some of those matters, I should say, one of those matters is the reforming of the Constitution of Jamaica. Active youth involvement and engagement in the constitutional reform process is critical, and it is important that we understand that anything done for youth, without youth, runs the risk of failure. Active youth engagement in the process, it encourages active citizenship and national pride. It can help us understand the Constitution in its current form, and most importantly, allows us to participate in what it will be. It will allow us to understand our responsibilities, our rights, which can lead to greater involvement in other areas of this country's life. Active youth engagement in the process of constitutional reform, it engenders a spirit of inclusivity and participation. Jamaica's new constitution, it must mirror the aspirations, the needs, and views of all Jamaicans, including our young people. Our young people must not simply be invited to the table so that our presence becomes a mere decoration, it becomes tokenistic, ticking a box. No. We therefore must have proactive and meaningful engagement, listening keenly to concerns and even dissenting views. They have to be a part of the conversation. So yes, Involve our young people in the conversation. Invite them to be members of the subcommittees of the Constitutional Reform Committee. Allow them to challenge the status quo and ask the questions that adults are afraid to ask. Allow the young people to, as we say, to go there. Create spaces, both virtual and physical, to give them the opportunity to have meaningful discussions and to share their perspectives on proposed changes to the Constitution. Invite them to vlog. Invite them to, and create social media perspective and accounts for the process. Have associated hashtags for the process. Create TikTok videos for the process and YouTube videos. Use popular entertainers to carry the message. We want the conversation to be far-reaching. We want to be involved. News sound bites and town hall meetings will not cut it alone. There has to be more, and we expect more. It's a perfect opportunity, this youth engagement, to help to build and to rebuild trust in democracy. Oh, how loud are the cries of distrust in the process in our country. We hear it. We say it sometimes in our discussions, how displeased we are with the democratic process in our country. This is a very good opportunity to help to rebuild the trust, to help have young people have a say in where we go, so that they will know that they have invested their time as well as their views. Their views are heard and their perspectives considered. Finally, this constitutional reform is a big deal. It is a big deal. It calls for unity. It calls for inclusivity, trust, honesty, transparency, and deep introspection as a people. However, young people, I must urge us that for youth engagement to work, we have a responsibility. We have to get involved. We have to take charge. We must seek information. So let us not be guilty of having an attitude of entitlement where we believe that the information must come to us. We have to go out and we have to look for it for the communication process and the engagement process to be whole. So active youth engagement, it will ensure that every youth from every walk of life, from every background, from every influence, will have a chance to be meaningfully and equitably involved in the process to reform our constitution, Jamaica's constitution. For like justice, youth engagement must not only be done, but must also be seen to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Christina. I would like to apologize to you for the very anemic applause. I think it's because there was no refreshment served earlier. But I think she deserves a louder applause than that. And I think what was impressive is that she did not only speak to us as a young person, but she also spoke to the youth. To the youth, to get involved, to get engaged. And a lot, I hope you are jotting down for those whose memory is not so sharp again, jotting down your questions so that when we come to question and answers, we can ask them. We now continue, and as I said, we have a galaxy of stars here this evening. And the planners, they have sought their best to keep them on track. And to do that, they have assigned them questions. They don't need any introduction, and I am not going to perpetuate the bad Jamaican practice of saying somebody does not need any introduction and proceed to give a half-hour introduction. They need no introduction. They have served this country at different levels in public ways all along, for a long time. And so I'm going to invite in order. They'll all sit here together, but in order of the lineup, that is order they'll come in the batting order. That is not a good analogy now for West Indies, but you know what I mean, that this is the way that they will come to the microphone. What is a constitution is the first question. And what is its function? And why is it necessary? Professor Tracy Robinson will come. And she is the one who will deal with that. We know she's an academic. She is also that A word by profession. If you sit, just sit. She's a good attorney. And then we are going to, the second question, we have engaged in a constitutional process before. What lessons do we need to learn from that earlier process? And Professor Trevor Monroe will address that question. And the third question, which was crafted, is we are proposing to change to a Republican form of government. What is this? And how should it function in our context? And Professor Rosalia Hamilton will. And then the fourth question, why is it important for public participation in the current constitutional reform process? And Jeanette Calder will speak to that. And to borrow a phrase from the JCC General Secretary, hope we stop using those phrases soon. Without further ado, we are going to invite now our first presenter, Professor Robinson, to come.
Thank you very much, Moderator, and I'm duly warned about the 7 minutes. And I think for many people, the beginning of the conversation about reform is what are we reforming from? What is the Constitution? And the Constitution is really meant to be our chosen fundamental law. And notice my use of the word or, first person plural. It sets up the institutions of government and the rights of persons that we believe will best support our shared conceptions and terms for justice, for peace, for good governance, for progress, for living together. It defines the territory, generally tells you who is a citizen. It sets up the parameters for the distribution and control of governmental power, whether it be the running of the country through the executive, judicial power, or lawmaking power. It tells us which institutions, which persons can exercise governmental power and how. It is therefore essential, though not sufficient, to having a system of limited rather than authoritarian government. Although it's a written document and written in English, which most of us speak, you may have discovered it is virtually unreadable, using the tools you ordinarily use for trying to read text. I don't know if you've tried. And so I think instead of thinking about the Constitution as a flat text, I think we should think about it as a structure and of interconnected components that build a dynamic, potent, always imperfect, three-dimensional structure or formation. That structure or formation has very detailed interrelated components. Take, for example, the Office of the Auditor General. Discussed in primarily 3 sections, 120 to 122, but they have 16 subsections, 5 of which break down into smaller sections. That means nearly 30 components one has to make sense of. But when you begin to put those components together, you see that they're connected to other chapters, the public service, Parliament, the executive, and even the judiciary. Because the Auditor General, it turns out, although part of the executive, has been structured with a kind of independence that is almost exactly like a judge. And that's precisely because she's intended to perform an invaluable function in supporting Parliament's oversight of the executive. If we think of the Constitution in this three-dimensional sense, as a structure which is a living formation, then you should also notice that there are components in it that are actually not in this text. And by that I mean there are rules which are constitutional in effect, but don't form part of this text. They include, for example, our electoral laws. They include a growing body of laws that have now created a set of institutions I would describe as rule of law institutions. INDECOM, the Public Defender, and so on, the Integrity Commission. These rules are outside the Constitution, but they are constitutional in effect. There are also practices which are deeply embedded but are not in this text. For example, the Constitution says the Governor General serves at the pleasure of the King. But we know perfectly well that, in fact, the Governor General serves at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. That's a practice. That's an unwritten rule rather than what's in the text. And then you have judicial decisions which authoritatively tell us what the Constitution means. The entire landscape matters. And part of the discussion is not simply about what's in the text, but what ought to be in the text, and whether some of those statutory rules which are constitutional in effect should form part of a written text. Another way of thinking about this three-dimensional dynamic structure which I'm describing the Constitution as, rather than a flat text, is that it's not made in a moment. It is created and recreated by how we live with it, how it functions, how we work with it. Constitutions are, if I put it this way, peopled structures. A little too pessimistically, perhaps, Ralph Carnegie, the Jamaican constitutional scholar, says we can't do without a constitution, but even if we could prove that it is theoretically impossible to have a good one, we still need it. It is indispensable but imperfect, and therefore we should rely on our experience, our reasonableness, and restraint in the administration for its effective working. The last thing I want to say about this three-dimensional structure, rather than a flat text, is that it has key mechanical elements to bear in mind that determine its efficacy and also its vitality. And I just want to mention quickly three. One is this idea that it is supreme. This idea that it is higher than ordinary laws made by Parliament or even the actions of the executive. It prescribes or it limits what those who govern can do. And it provides a mechanism for holding them accountable to respect the rules. Doesn't always work, and it happens primarily but not entirely through the courts. So supremacy matters. It is an important mechanism for how the Constitution works. A second mechanism is entrenchment, and we are all in a way familiar, even though you may not have looked at it, at Section 49, which provides a mechanism that allows the Constitution to be changed, but makes it a little hard. And it makes it hard to force us to be deliberative, and it's the context in which we are in a conversation about the need for a referendum to approve changes to who is the head of state. The third critical component often receives very little attention. If you move from one way of operating constitutionally to another, you must have transitional provisions. Those transitional provisions have been typically found in what you've heard people describe as the order in council, but the valuableness of transitional provisions have never been fully understood, but they will make a big impact on the effectiveness of the Constitution, and they have impacted generally very negatively the effectiveness of the current Constitution. Please keep in mind that it's not just the substance of the Constitution, but the machinery that is integral to its work in that matters. So the last thing I'm going to say in my 7 minutes, and maybe the most important thing about a Constitution, is where its legitimacy comes from. And it comes from its authorship by we, the people. Jamaica's constitution does not offer even this most basic signal that we, the people, have authored it, nor does it even declare that it is establishing a democratic state. Constitutions ultimately must be our own. Constitutions tell us where sovereignty lies or rests. Currently, sovereignty sits at Buckingham Palace. When we say we wish to get rid of the monarchy, that tells you only the starting point. It does not tell you the destination or where we'll end up. Similarly, patriating the Constitution is an abstraction that delinks the Constitution from its UK roots, but doesn't tell us enough about who or what will give it legitimacy and make it our own. The Latin res publica, which gives rise to the term republic, means an entity or thing governed by the people. To become a republic is to center the sovereignty of the people, and to patriate the Constitution must mean to patriate it to the people of Jamaica. If we only talk about decolonization and not democracy, we will end up repatriating or bringing back to Jamaica inedible what left. A political system that the CCJ in 2013 describes as characterized by, quote, a paucity of checks and balances to restrain an overweening executive beset with malignant tumors that eat away at democracy. If there's consensus on Jamaica being a republic, I read it as not simply about getting rid of the monarchy. I read it as Jamaicans desiring a constitution that centers their sovereignty and deepens our democracy.
Moderator Carl, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am asked to speak on lessons from previous experience in the constitutional process. I've started the first lesson utilizing the terminology of Archbishop Ken a moment ago. The colonial approach which characterized the making of Jamaica's independence constitution leads to a not fully democratic system. That colonial approach leads to a system that we have now, that our king is being installed on the throne next week, Saturday. King will be installed. Secondly, a parliamentary system with two-party dominance. The colonial approach in the conversations that led to the formation of our independence constitution, which we still have, has explicit provisions in there to ensure that third parties will gain little recognition. We can go into that in more detail. Thirdly, the colonial approach leads to a constitution that has an office of the Prime Minister, which, to use the terminology of a member of the Constitution Making Committee in 1961, is, quote unquote, a constitutional dictator for 5 years, end of quotes. And it leads to a system, that colonial approach, that can only be changed not by how it was made, in this case by 16 individuals between October 31, 1961 and February 27, 1962, 4 months, but can only be changed fundamentally if the two parliamentary parties agree and then put the issue to a majority of the people to vote. That colonial approach, ladies and gentlemen, concretely meant that our independence constitution was made by a committee of 16 5 of whom were not elected. They were in the Legislative Council at the time. 11 of whom were elected in an election in which independence was not an issue. And that committee of 16 from the two parties drafted, agreed, and came to a consensus in a process that was closed to the public. There were no minutes that were made public. The daily release excluded explicitly, unconsciously, decisions that were made. The public of Jamaica was initially given 2 weeks to make submissions on what the Constitution should have. That was extended to 30 days eventually. And the submissions were to be made with no draft of what the thinking of the committee was, with no identification of the issues that would be discussed and decided, and most of all, with absolutely no educational material. There are no conversations beginning in the way that this conversation is. Arising from that, there were only 78 memoranda that were received, and these were only considered by a subcommittee of 2 of the committee of 16. And those who submitted memoranda were invited to develop on the memoranda at only the 10th meeting of 12. And by the time they were invited, all the fundamental decisions that I just described, that we should have a king or a queen, that there should be an entrenched two-party system, all of those were made. And therefore, there was no significant impact on what came out of that colonial approach, which therefore ends with a constitution that's not fully democratic. There's a contrasting lesson that we can learn from a later constitutional process, and that was the one that began in 1991. In that case, the committee was a committee of 39 persons, only 16 of whom were from the two parties. 23 were from youth organizations, trade unions, women's organizations, the private sector, teachers, the church, professional organizations of one sort or another. They had forums in 14 different parish forums, and most of all, they put out educational material so that people weren't discussing what is a ceremonial and an executive president in abstract. They had simple material which explained what the Constitution had in it and how it could or could not be changed. That very basic educational material is actually produced by Dr. Lloyd Barnett, who is still with us and a member of the current committee. They received 129 submissions. Their conclusions were put to joint select committees of Parliament, 3 of them consecutively, each of which was open to public representations. And, of course, there were oral submissions as well. However, the process was interrupted and stalled very often by the fact that Parliament met insufficiently. Our Parliament, as you know, meets a maximum of 40 times per year, usually for one afternoon on a Tuesday afternoon. So that 3 elections disrupted the momentum of the findings of that Constitutional Commission. It was interrupted by the election of 1997, and then a joint select committee had to be reformed to take more public submissions. It was interrupted by the general election of 2007, and again by 2009. So that the bill arising from those deliberations was only passed in 2011, and that has given us a Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, incomplete, inadequate, but a big step over the colonial approach which gave us the Bill of Rights in the Independence Constitution. So we now have a Charter of Rights in 2011 which provides for non-discrimination against persons, whether because they are male or female. Up until 2011, there was no constitutional prohibition against keeping a woman down from promotion by virtue of her being female. That changed in 2011. 2011, arising from a more consultative approach, we have a right to a healthy and productive environment. People cannot simply go to Dry Harbor and begin mining without that process being challenged in the courts as it is now. And most of all, the rights that are developed in 2011, it is explicitly stated that those rights, freedom of movement included, the security of the person included, cannot be abridged, cannot be infringed, cannot be abrogated, except as, quote unquote, justified in a free and democratic society, end of quotes. So that we now have recourse whenever we feel that our security of the person or freedom of movement is abridged unjustifiably by a state of emergency arising from that consultative approach which gave us the 2011 Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. We can go to the courts, and the courts, not the Prime Minister, not the executive, not the Parliament, they can determine that your right was abridged in a manner that's not justified in a free and democratic society. So the lessons that we learn is that public education, consultation, participation, including the youth and all sectors of our society, produces more beneficial results for the people than the colonial approach, which produces beneficial results for the minority. And hence I conclude that the current process that is underway needs to be fundamentally transformed insofar as it does not seem to be learning the lessons of the colonial approach of 1961-62, in that we do not have any minutes of what was being done. We do not have any ability. There's no live streaming of the meetings that are taking place. As is indeed it has happened when ordinary legislation is being passed, the joint select committees, you can go on Public Broadcasting Corporation and see and hear what's going on. Most of all, there's absolutely no public educational material that can help to inform the very important debate as to whether our president should be elected or not, ceremonial or executive. And to that extent, I would hope that this initial conversation, to be followed by many more like this, will ensure that this existing constitutional committee learn the lessons of the past, that the colonial approach is not going to be in the interest of the Jamaican people, and that we want real consultation, and that consultation is going to take time. It only should be tied to a timetable of what is really possible and necessary for consultation, and not tied to the timetable of any election that may be coming in the near future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Fellow Jamaicans, good evening. I want to just start by thanking the Jamaica Council of Churches for this effort. Excellent initiative. I'm here to talk about the Republic, the form of government. It's an important question because just this week, I noted at I think it was last week's post-cabinet press conference, the Minister of Information said, a simple choice before the Jamaican people is whether to move to a republic or to retain the constitutional monarchy. It begs the question, what is that republic? And, you know, if you Google the term, you'll see many different forms of a republic. And in Jamaica, we talk a lot about the parliamentary form or the presidential form. But both are rooted in histories that give real meaning to these republics. In the case of the Americans, they talk about, for example, creating a constitution in order to perfect their union. It's a whole historical development of Confederate states, and the idea was to strengthen central government to make their governance arrangement more unified and workable. In the case of the British, it's a long history of that struggle between an elite in Britain and the monarchy. And part of that history, they chop off Charles I's head, right? Lost his head in the process. The monarchy was thrown out, and they've set up a parliamentary system that they shared across the world. I want to pick up where Prof. Robinson left off, because I think the way that Jamaicans need to think about this republic is to laser focus on this concept, this inherited concept that have come through all the historical experiences, rooted in the word res publica, a public thing, belongs to the people. And if we contextualize that, we understand that our history of Jamaica is rooted in a history in which the place called Jamaica and the people who were left after the decimation and the genocide of the indigenous people, and those who were trafficked into this country, were seen as property, private property of the monarch and the British government. And so this idea that Jamaica belongs to all of us is a fairly new idea, because for much of our history, this place called Jamaica and all of us was private property. Now, I frame this idea of this move to a republic as the move towards an ideal, not a destination. As Prof. Robinson said, you don't move the king and declare that we've made it. We've seen a lot of countries do that. What remained is the institutions that were set down during that entire period in which we were private property. I like to think about it as a house, so the British came and they built a house, and they crammed all of us into the house, and they left the best spaces and places on the top. The best food, the best education system, the best healthcare arrangement, everything just for a few people at the top. And over the years, certainly since independence, more of us want to go to the top. That's where the good life is. That's where our living standards are improved. But the house was never built for all of us, or even most of us, to be at the top. It was built for a few. And in fact, our founding father in the Constitution made it very clear, Norman Manley, when he said 90% of the Constitution at independence we inherited. 90% of it didn't change. Remember, the house was built with rules about who can get to the top, about what kind of food you eat, whether you have access to land, and so on. So the rules were set up, not just the constitutional arrangement, all kinds of rules, including rules, for example, in how we access the beaches, right? So we've had all of that arrangement that we've inherited. We've not changed much. The institutions that came out of that set of rules have pretty much remained intact. Yes, there have been some changes, but clearly not enough to hold all of us wanting to get to the top. So for me, the perspective of the move to a republic is a journey. It's part of this unfinished business since emancipation. At emancipation, we yearned for freedom, self-determination, regaining our humanity after decades of being treated as less than human. Today, those issues are still on the table. And so the remnants of what's left is what we're trying to, quote unquote, decolonize. We're trying to get rid of it. And the symbolic move from the king is important in that context. But for many Jamaicans, it's not the most important thing. It's how does that move to become a republic translate to assisting us in completing that journey. In other words, how do we rebuild this house so that all of us can not just eat our food, but we can lift our standard of living? Today, Jamaica sits way below the world average with respect to living standards. $5,000 on average. The world living standards is 50,000. Gives you a measure of where we are. We have a long way to go. And so rebuilding that house is critical. And when I talk about the republic, and many people see no link between the rules and the legal framework in building a republic and the economic framework we absolutely need to build that better house, to increase the wealth of our nation so more of us can live better. And so I'll point to some ways I think it's important to think about it. So we've inherited this top-down legal constitutional framework in which the power was in the hands of the monarchy and the few, the British and so on, and the elites and the governor and so on. And then at independence, that shifted in the hands of the executive, the cabinet, the prime minister. That's where the power resided. So although we see in our constitution that the monarch is an executive, real executive power is in the hands of the prime minister and the cabinet. And we've had 60 years of what that looks like. And I think the assessment after 60 years, and you've heard it from a former prime minister who said the weakness over that 60 years has been the political parties and what they've delivered for Jamaica. You've heard it through the mouth of people, of someone who sat in the highest office. And so it's very clear that the governance arrangement is inadequate. And at the core is the centralization of power in the hands of the executive. And so if we're going beyond the constitutional changes required to move the king, it begs the question, what are these other constitutional changes required to empower Jamaicans, to make Jamaicans sovereign? And those will have to turn on the structure of our parliament. So if we think about it, we have a house where our representatives sit. But how many of us feel that that's the people's house, where our views are heard? And so that's one transformation that can take place. And we can think about that in terms of the structure of the house, the ratio of executive to non-executive members, to ensure that the non-executive members of the parliament have an effective oversight and check on the executive. And so we have to redefine the roles of our parliamentarians, not just the executive function, which is very strong, but the legislative function, especially on the part of the non-executive legislators. They need to ensure that our voices are heard and ensure there's effective oversight. And so things like public petitioning, where you and I and all of us have an opportunity to go to Parliament and say, here is an issue of concern to us. We need to fix this. And we are providing perspectives that typically the ministers and the bureaucrats who have their hands full trying to do other kinds of stuff are not seen because they're not in the trenches like many of us. That's where you give the voice to young people who are at the cutting edge of the technologies and the creativity we need in order to transform our economy and to create new economies for the future. We need to give them a voice. And it's when we create structures that give our people a voice, we can transform our economy. And so we talk about provisions like participatory budgeting, where we can have a say in the budget. And we can help to shape the kinds of economic decisions that can transform our economy. And so these things must happen in parallel. And so when people say, this republic have nothing to do with me, I don't know how that to go put food on my table, and so on, listen carefully. Think about what we're doing. This is a unique opportunity where we can create these governance structures that can assist us in transforming our economy, giving life to the creative potential that exists in Jamaica and is bottled up. Just today I was talking to a journalist and I said, Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, and all our greats are just a sample of what Jamaica can produce. If we truly create a framework to unleash the potential of the Jamaican people, we will flood the world with more Usain Bolts and Bob Marleys and all our greats. That's who we are. We are creative people. All right. And I'll wrap up by saying the Republic is ultimately what we create. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Bishop, Reverend Minot, Reverend Newton, and rest of the clergy, thank you very much for inviting me to share this evening on a question that is very personal for me. So I really will be coming at it from a place of what public participation has meant to me, with the hope that it will resonate with the persons who are here and those who are watching online. And this is a bit of a reflection because it has changed over the years, but I'm a former public servant and a proud former public servant. I came back home in 2012 after retooling to come back into the public service. And I ended up doing a different kind of public service. That's what my father tells me it is, because I ended up in advocacy sometime around 2013. And there are two things that struck me that let me pivot from public sector work in a ministry to the kind of public service I'm doing now. One was politics is too important to be left to the politician. Yeah. I still get goosebumps when I say it and when I think about it, because immediately when I read that sometime in 2004 and never forgot it, it was pointing more at me. And I say to young people when I do workshops that every time I point at a politician, there are 3 fingers pointing back at me. The other thing that I read once was by a British parliamentarian, Anthony Benn, who said that liberty, and he also used the word democracy, the price of democracy is eternal vigilance. Oh, it sounds tiring to hear it, but the truth is, it's only tiring when a few of us are doing it. It's a whole different ball game. And what I've discovered since I'm in advocacy is that I live in a jurisdiction where it doesn't require thousands in the street anymore. I've done advocacy for 10 years and realized that not only have we changed and matured, and this might sound a little controversial, but our politicians have changed and have matured. Maybe not at the pace we have wanted them to, but I've been engaging them, and I've been told so many stories about what to expect from politicians. And Rev, I have found that is not really quite the case. And the only way I could stand here this evening to try to encourage you is because I've tested it, and I've tried it, and I have found that though the faces predominantly have remained the same, they too have changed. And the only way we're going to find out is if we put it to the test. The other thing that has struck me about Jamaica, which is also a little controversial, but I don't mind saying it and defending it because I am putting it to the test, is that all the ingredients that we need for change are here. They are here. Save and except for one thing that I have found is missing, and it is the citizen, to be honest with you. Now, I'm going to share with you an analogy that helped me to participate, and again, I share it with young people. And it's just a coincidence that I'm standing in front of the analogy I'm going to share. But I always say to them, if you think about a microphone and how it works, yes? There's a whole lot going on back here that you can't see. But the point I want to make is that this cable, it's extremely important that this cable is properly engaged into the microphone. Now, just in case it got slightly disconnected or fully disconnected and you can't see, you would not be hearing me. But you know what you'd be thinking? I would be saying, made in where? I would start to doubt the efficacy of the machinery here. I would start to question about the obsolescence of the others down there. But the truth is that nothing is wrong with what's down there and nothing is wrong with the microphone. The only thing that had happened is that it was designed to be connecting and touching. And as I thought about our democracy, it came home to me that it is designed for citizens to be engaged and touching on the important cornerstones of parliamentary work. And I didn't see where enough of that was happening, and I came to the conclusion that public participation is necessary in a more sustained way, because it's the disengagement of the citizens I believed is really creating the problem. Are we having a challenge with the model, the governance model? Yes, and everybody coming before has given us an understanding of why. Do we have problems with the way our politicians govern? I would say yes. In the last year, I have heard so many times our parliamentarians say, you have elected me to govern. Let me govern. This document here, the Constitution that's in my hand, I lived too long before I knew, Prof, that this is what it looked like. You want to know what I imagined? I kid you not. I was engaged in advocacy, doing my best, never thinking of this document. I kept picturing a room with a massive bookshelf from floor to ceiling, with volumes of thick, black, gold writings on it, because, you know, that must be what the Constitution is. This is the document on which all legislation hangs. So I never thought of engaging it because that was outside of my domain. But I began to read Gordon Robinson's articles, and I began to realize that, boy, I'm going to have to get the courage, because the truth of it is why the public has to participate is because the quality of our lives really does depend on what's in this document. So, Prof, I was shocked the day I went down to Duke Street and begged a copy. I thought I was going to need a truck. If you put all the Pauline epistles together, Rev, I don't think it comes up to this. My smallest textbook in high school was pretty much the size of this, yet calling myself an educated Jamaican, and I had no idea what was in a document that determined the quality of all of our lives. So that is the reason that we should be participating. I just want to give you a quick analogy, one more, to explain why I am engaged and I want to encourage everybody. This Constitution and the way it operates, when I started to read it, I realized that every home has a constitution. If you think about it, there are rules that govern our homes. It's unwritten, but they're there. There's somebody in that home that's going to make the decisions. You might start with mommy, but you know you're working your way up to daddy, or inverse. It might be the matriarch, the grandmother. And from you're born and you're working your way through, you're figuring it out. There are roles and responsibilities in the home, and it differs. In some homes, the boys are treated differently. The gap is wider. In some homes, rarely is there none. Your dad tells you when to come home. It sets up some structures. That's the Constitution. But let's say you're 26 years old. You're working now, and you're contributing. Your salary goes straight to that decision maker. They take out what they think you should contribute, the light, the water. They're still telling you what time you should come home. But you're thinking to yourself, I'm 26. You believe that you've gotten to the stage where you should be consulted because you're contributing, but you're not. There's a family meeting, you come, but nobody still asks what you think about it. Does this begin to sound familiar? Is anybody seeing the analogy that I'm drawing? I see some heads, absolutely. I think that's a silent amen. So here we are, and we're 60. We're adults. The nation has matured. The government has gotten a lot right. We've become educated. This is not 1944, 1959, or 1962. There's a body of expertise in this room and a contribution to be made. But there is no entry point for the citizen in this document beyond to tell me what is a citizen. That's it. The Kenyan Constitution begins by saying the people are sovereign. I had to look the word up when I saw it. It meant possessing supreme or ultimate power. Can you see the difference between the two? So I'm really here saying that the reason you have to participate is, as long as you're disengaged, the system won't work without you. I'm beyond saying that it is the politicians' fault. I am at a point where I know I'm an owner and I know I'm an employer of 63 members in the lower house, 84 in total. And as an employer, I have a responsibility to be vigilant. So JAMP, for those who don't know, I'm an executive of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, puts money where their mouth is. We have made 6 digital tools to allow citizens to monitor government, to have access to government, and to begin to understand government better. Why do we participate? Because Jamaica is really waiting more on the citizen than it is waiting on anyone else. It doesn't matter the model that we change to. If we continue to disengage, we will still end up back right where we are. So I hope these thoughts have helped you somewhat, and I thank you for the opportunity to share it with you.
Thanks. And the evening has just begun. Because now that you have presented, we are now going to be engaged in a time of interaction. But you know, one of the things that the virtual world has taught us is these things are called stretch break. You must always just pause and pause and pause. I'm going to ask you, those who want to just stand and stretch, Jerry, who will join Jerry to do that, just stand and stretch a little bit, if you want to. I mean, and to get prepared to go to the microphone while you do so. Just a few minutes. If I could sing, I would have led you into get up, stand up. Stand up for you. But I was going to change right to life, because I really think that this process is about life and the quality of our life. So good. Thank you, everybody. Lord, this is how we're going to proceed. Chrissy, I'm going to ask you to join us here, because I think that was really your chair and not mine. We'll ask you to join us, and then this is how we're going to do it. We're going to be inviting, and please, friends, you know, one of the things that Jeanette appealed for is participation. And she logged into what every other speaker said. Participation. Right? Now, I'm going to just lay down some ground rules in this. You don't have a public a copy of the agenda and the order. I do. I am pleased to announce that there is someone designated to give the vote of thanks. So those who are speaking need not come and thank the speakers. We have somebody to do that already. Just ask your question. Do not make a speech. Just ask your question. If there is sluggishness in the number of persons, we'll allow you to ask more than one, but not at the same time. I'm going to beg of you, cooperate with me. I'm trying to be a kind Jamaican this evening. Please. So, Sir Jerry, your first question. You're taking up most of the time for the question.
No. I noticed that, all right, we're going to have an hour, right? Not me. All of us going to have an hour. Not me, you know.
Yes. You only have 2 minutes left.
Regardless of the Parliament and the Prime Minister, they run over the time.
Man, we'll have enough time to ask.
All right, hear this now. Government, I would like each person there possibly to comment. Government, govern who or what? And the right to land is a human right. But in 1945, the rich of the world insisted that it must not be included in the Human Rights Charter. The right to land. Every morning around the summer live, every morning there's a government minister pass at 7:30 with a vanguard and a rear guard and siren a blare through the traffic every morning. how we're going to get to control them. But who or what does government govern? Please.
Thank you.
I would like a comment from
Yes, just hold on. We'll just take some questions. Thank you, Jerry. So that's one who government. Next person, please.
Greetings, everyone. Xavier Yestelin. May God give you good health. I'm Haile Mikhail Kojo. I'm many things to many people, including being the parliamentary, or one of parliamentary caretakers in Westmoreland Eastern. I'm also the author of the only document I know which proposes a constitution for Republic Jamaica. If you look at that wall there, you will see a flyer that I put up. And I would like you, sir, to defer your statement about making a speech and accommodate this 3 minutes to tell you what is in this document. I could read it word for word.
No, but I'm going to allow you to do it, but not now.
No, this is the document.
No, but not now.
Not now.
No, you're going to ask a question now.
Okay.
Good. If time allows, when we're finishing, I'll make you make your speech.
Okay, I'll ask the question in this way. Is the Jamaica Council of Churches willing to sit with me tomorrow? I live in Westmoreland. I have things to do down there, but I'm willing to stay here tomorrow from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to go through this 86-article document, 40 pages, to see if we can agree on what I have written with the assistance of many people and many documents, international documents as well. And I'd like, that's the question.
That's the question?
Yes, but,
okay,
but before I close, I'd like to commend Professor Tracy Robinson for acknowledging this document and having it as the subject of the 5th Mona Law, public law debate, and it's on YouTube. Thanks again, Professor.
Good, thank you. So that question, no man, I will get an answer for you. That question will be answered quickly by the President of the JCC and General Secretary. They'll do it. They'll do it. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I've been coming to Jamaica for 26 years. My daughter was here in the Peace Corps. I come because you have children that wash windscreens and don't go to school. I'm setting up a trade school to address that problem. And he who is ignorant of history is condemned to repeat it. So my question to you is, will you please remember that in 1838 you were emancipated from slavery. You no longer live on a plantation. You can throw out the British class system, the British red tape, fill the potholes, convict your politicians and officials who are corrupt. We're going to get Trump. He will be in jail eventually. Our Constitution has 7 articles and some amendments. What do you have over here? 38 articles? The Constitution needs to be principles. And then you write the laws. You need an executive, a legislator, and a judicial. And they need to be equal. Are you going to do that? Or are you going to talk about it?
Okay, thank you. So I was trying to see how I could articulate that question. You're asking the panelists whether they are willing to advocate for a constitution that will ensure that politicians can be imprisoned. That's what you... That's what she's asking. Yeah, that's what that is. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Thanks for allowing questions.
Yeah.
My question is, in keeping with the prayer that was made by Garth Minot in the opening of this program, he put a lot of emphasis on our reliance on God for wisdom. Wisdom for our government. And I'm saying no matter which form of government we might have, the most fundamental issue is our reliance on God for his wisdom and our willingness to follow his direction. Because righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Now, my question is this. I understand the great desire that we have to leave a constitutional monarchy and to become a republic. But I tell you the truth. In June of this year, there is a document that the European Union is hoping that the Jamaican government will sign. It's called the African, Caribbean, Pacific European Union Treaty. And if you read this document, you see that it is going to cause the Prime Minister, the President at the time, whoever he will be, the Parliament, the Senate, to be paralyzed in the sense that they won't be free to make their independent decisions, because there is going to be the Organization of African, Caribbean, Pacific States with the European Union Council of Ministers to make the final decision concerning what laws we make. So we're leaving the King of England. I have no problem about that. But what are we getting ourselves into? Are we going to subject ourselves to a group of people outside of Jamaica to make the final decisions for our country? As I said earlier, the important thing is that we rely on God and follow His wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to pause now and ask the panelists. Do you remember the questions? At least there are two. The first one really was asking who or what government governs who or what. And then I will allow, Professor Tracy, you want to begin and then we move down?
Testing. So I think if I were to put the question slightly differently or to respond to it in this way, I would say government in whichever branch governs on behalf of. And that's, I think, a critical element. And they govern on behalf of the people. I've heard the judiciary that enjoys, by nature of the work it does, a fair amount of independence, explain that there must be limits on whether it should answer to the executive. It must enjoy independence from the executive, but it must, as a measure of judicial accountability, have a way of being in conversation with the people. I don't know if you've noticed the Chief Justice having public discussions, presenting ideas in public. It's one of the reasons judges write written decisions. But I think each organ of government has a responsibility to do their work in a relationship to the people. And so I would say that that is a critical dimension of how we think about governance and should think about governance, that it really has to be deeply connected to service to the people.
Thanks. Trevor?
We haven't said who or what government.
Well, let Trevor answer that one then directly,
Who or what? Who or what government is, Jerry? Or who or what?
Government.
Well, it's supposed to do what Tracy did.
No, govern who or what? Who or what?
But remember,
Govern the
Jerry,
people.
Govern we?
Govern the people. It makes laws. The cabinet is the principal instrument of policy.
No government can govern me.
Oh, okay.
Not the government.
Okay. I'm only telling
all right, but so therefore you know the answer.
I want to know what you say.
Okay, good. Well, let's move to the other question, because I think the JCC one, as I said, the principal officers can answer that. The question that I really want to put to you is perhaps the one that is asking, how will we ensure that the Constitution assists us from undue external influence? That's how I read, where is it? That's how I read that last question.
Walk to the land. Is land a human right?
Yes. Jerry, just calm down, man. We soon come, man. We soon come.
All right, if I may, I want to just say that we have some experts in the audience on the matter of land with Jerry. I don't want to set up a member of the Advocates Network here, But there is a colleague who's done a lot of work in this space because we see it as an important part of this conversation about how we reposition ourselves in this new world. So I'd ask my colleague, Dr. Patricia Green, if she wants to say a few words there. I'd like to speak to your point about external arrangements. I must say I didn't quite understand the ACP-EU arrangement as creating any external dominance.
That's why I moved it from that specific,
I'm not
general.
Yes, I don't, but it's an important point though, because I don't want the public to think that there's anything in that agreement that is somehow going to impose external dominance. That's not my understanding. I can say, for example, we have had in some of our agreements, like the arrangements in the World Trade Organization, where we've put up new arrangements to settle disputes. And some of those dispute settlements are effectively outside of our jurisdiction and have, impacts. The effectiveness of it is yet to be determined because we've seen what has happened in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, and they won the case and so on and so on. So you have that, you have those issues, but I'm not aware of that. And therefore, I think what we should be mindful of as we create these changes in our Constitution, as well as create new laws, modify the existing laws, and so on, is that we are creating these arrangements on our terms and in our interests. There are economic realities that push us into these external arrangements, and it looks like, and for many Jamaicans, they'll tell you, it feels like it's the IMF that's running the country or the World Bank and all these kinds of arrangements. And a lot of that is tied to the way we think about and engage our economic arrangement. But I don't think we should be preoccupied with that. I think we ought to think about what specific provisions we put in place. The last point is this idea that we're no longer on a plantation. Again, people can frame it differently, but I want to say this, that the legacies, the institutional legacies of slavery persist. There are 20% of Jamaicans who are living in squatting communities. That's the point that I think Jerry is making about land, right? We have an apartheid education system that we're struggling to change. And in 2023, we've not been able to change that significantly, and our kids are leaving school and they're not properly educated. They're not prepared for the world of work. We have a healthcare system, and Professor Beckles has spent a lot of time talking about the legacies of the health impact. So, and we could go on.
But Rosalia, I don't want to keep the question as holding, but let us put yourself on the corner, and somebody would say, how will this new constitution address those issues?
Okay, so I want to come back to the point implied in her point, which is that we can't continue to blame the past. And I think that's what I'm hearing. And I think the issue of where we are now must be understood and rooted in those problems. And since independence, it's our, the responsibility is in our hands. So in that sense, I say, yes, we have to take responsibility. And part of that is the decision of the Jamaican people to say, yes, we are going to consciously rebuild that house, create new rules, put new constitutional arrangements in place. And it is when we begin to do that, we unravel. But the idea that we simply forget the past, which is not what was said, but I think could be implied in the statement, I think we have to be careful.
Careful, good. Okay, so next question.
Can I just add quickly to what
We'll take
Rosa
two questions,
said?
and then we go to our online audience. They have some questions.
Thank you, Pastor. On all previous occasions when I've attended the sanctuary, I've left feeling very uplifted until now. We really have a problem. And I want to focus on the statement made by Professor Monroe that the executive is a constitutional dictatorship. And so we're not going to obviously correct this through the ballot box. And already what is coming to the public from the Constitutional Reform Committee suggests that there's a protectiveness around maintaining the status quo. Finally, it was Gordon Robinson who said that what happened in Barbados was just exchanging a white head of state with a black one. Is this what's going to happen in Jamaica? And how can we simultaneously with constitutional change have the kind of activism, I almost said revolution, bloodless of course, that will change the course of history in this country?
Thank you, Henry. Horace?
Thank you. Thanks, boss. I'm concerned that this whole process of constitutional reform can get bogged down by the fact that there are so many issues to be dealt with. Rosalie just listed some of them: education, agriculture, and land, health, and so on. And so I'm asking if this influential body, Council of Churches, which has formed this conversation, could take on itself the task of trying to suggest to those running the process that we need to have some sort of organized series of what the priority questions are to go through, right? So if you'll allow me, I won't be long, but I suggest there are about 4 or 5 just to start with, because there are lots of others that would follow, obviously. But the first one would be the one that Trevor has raised previously, and that is the question of process.
Of what?
Process.
Process, okay.
Is it to be open or closed, right? And most of us would say, obviously, it should be open, and the media should be there. But there are some who feel, that there should be some privacy. Secondly, do we have a Jamaican head or a foreign head? And of course, some people will still say foreign head. As one person on the radio said this afternoon, she's going to go home and bawl continuously if we don't say Jamaican head. But then the next question would be, how much power do we give to this head? Is it going to be just conduct ceremonies, or going to have some real power, right? And another question that would follow, it seems to me, is how much power do we give to the political parties, right? Because that's what's going to determine, because if the political parties and the Prime Minister, the head of state, or the head of government are the same party, we're not going to get any change. We're going to get the same. So the question then is, how much power should we give to a Senate? What should be the composition of the Senate? So I'm just sketching out some of the first questions on which the others can begin to build. Power of recall, impeachment, time limits, and all the rest.
Thank you.
I'm querying if the Council of Churches can't get some order into it in order to be able to proceed in a systematic way and not just be lost in a jungle of so many issues.
Okay. Since we have only one more standing, let me take that, and then we'll just come to the panelists.
Good evening, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure they're hearing you clearly. Yeah.
I hope this is better.
Yes.
Professor Trevor Monroe mentioned that we depend on the courts to protect our rights. The question is, when the court system, going through the courts, takes such a long time, isn't it very possible that persons lose faith in the legal system and begin to also lose faith in our democratic system? And I leave the second question for afterwards.
Okay, good. So, let me begin with Jeanette. That first question that Henley, who is depressed. Is this process really going to just protect, or meant to protect the status quo? That's what he was asking. What are your thoughts on the whole, how it has been sketched so far?
Well, I am an eternal optimist, so maybe I'm the best person to answer that question. I have a lot of hope for it, but it ties back into what I said before as it relates to the people of Jamaica and what we want. I am cautiously optimistic about the process so far. I have to admit that I think there has been a false start, but I can think of many things in life that has had a false start. We tend to say, what start by the morning can't come good evening. I don't think that this is where it is. My simple answer to it is, let me share with you what Rosalia has been doing in the last month, maybe as a way of giving you some hope. Rosalia had thrown out a challenge, and so I'm going to throw it out to everybody here with the hope of igniting some hope. And she said, we have to start talking to each other. At the time, we had no idea if the government would be talking to us. As a matter of fact, we watched an All Angles program where the minister pretty much had said, we did a lot of consultation in 1995. We know what the people think. That's 30 years ago. So listening to that, we didn't give up hope. We shifted gears. Rosalia said, why don't we start talking? Why don't we pivot to co-workers, youth group, service club, wherever you have a network, start even at your kitchen table and begin a discussion about the Constitution, no matter how small, no matter how big. Jot down the points coming out of it, feed it back to the Advocates Network. On the 6th of May, we will see all the ideas and all the concerns, and we, the people, will have a conversation and we'll get to the bottom of what we want. How that sound? So we said, that sounds wonderful. We don't have to wait on the government. We can begin the process ourselves. Horace is asking, what is the process? I think that we have all the ingredients. Remember what I said before? Christina was here with some ideas and suggestions, not just making demands. So I am very hopeful because what I see are the people saying, we're not going to wait. If government catches up with us, fine. But we're going to be going to them and we're going to be insisting that this is what we have come up with.
Since you tapped Christina,
Yes,
I want her
you
to make a
what
comment.
she says about
Yeah,
that.
but there's a microphone right there that you can use. But I think as you answer though and respond, is there a sense in the country where people are wondering if the horse has not gone through the gate already?
They are wondering.
And
but
I'm saying, so therefore,
it has not.
So therefore, I think part of the response could be,
yes,
how do we slow the process down?
Slow it down.
Yes. Well, let me take.
Right. So I do think that there is time. I do think that, but the time is now because we are on a momentum. And we know how it's important to keep momentum. So we have started
Can you hear
the
her?
process. Are you hearing?
I think that, yeah, let's use that mic.
Right, I was saying that momentum is important. So we have started the process. So there is time to get back, get to where we need to be, realign, get back to re-engagement. As I said in my presentation, it's important to engage, not just at the youth level, but it is important to meet people where they are. You said to start the conversation at the kitchen table. That's exactly what we need to do. Parents, what are we doing? Are we so hungry for information, as I said in my presentation? Go after, seek information. Not only rely on what we hear, but go after what we need to understand the process and not wait.
Trevor.
Trevor,
I think that we have to be very concrete and very practical. As we are sitting here, the government has said it is putting a bill in this month before the Parliament with the questions that will be put in a referendum. They have further said that having put that bill before Parliament, there's going to be 3 months and then a debate, and thereafter another 3 months. They have a timetable. Our first responsibility is to get sufficient voices to transform that timetable into a people's timetable. Now, that is not an easy, let's not underestimate the difficulty of that. We've had enough occasions in recent times where the government has taken decisions, not just this government, but where they've had to reverse, largely by virtue of public outcry. Remember, there was to be no festival song in the 60th anniversary year. There was to be none. The people made an outcry, and we had one. We were told that there would be cabinet papers. This was another decision, that the cabinet papers, which are the people's papers, now secret for 30 years, the government proposed that it would be secret for 70 years. There was an outcry, and that was reversed within 3 days.
Exactly.
So what we need to do, and this conversation is an important part of it, is to have so many conversations of this nature to say, look, you have a timetable, but that timetable has to be subordinated to people's engagement, and for people's engagement, you need to tell us what are the issues, and we are telling you what are our issues. Otherwise, you're all over the place. And I think Horace is quite appropriate. And that's how it was done in '91, that there was an educational booklet, that thousands of copies, and people got an understanding of what the Constitution is, how it can be changed, and then they made their voices felt, and we had some important changes. Nowhere far enough. But if we don't get this engagement going, as I think we are now, within the next few weeks, then the horse not only gone through the gate, I'm gone wherever the government wants him to go.
Rev, just a quick point.
Yeah.
Quick one, 10 seconds. And when I made reference a while ago to what the minister had said on all angles, and she was quite definitive about we have enough to work with, within 2 weeks, where did we see the minister? In Montego Bay, doing what? Having a consultation with the people. But what happened between that all angles and the minister showing up in Montego Bay? It was about people saying we need a consultation, and when are we having it? So that's the point I'm making when I say it's not as difficult as we think it is for that needle to move. It's for the people to make their voices heard. Yeah?
All right, thank you. Let's pause a little bit. We have some friends online who are asking questions. We're going to hear one or two of those questions now, and then we respond to them.
What does it mean to center the sovereignty of the people? What does that translate to in practical terms, constitutional provisions? That's the first question.
What does it mean to?
Center the sovereignty of the people.
Okay. And then ask the other one.
Okay, we have 3 more. Say briefly how the participatory budget, for Professor Hamilton, could she say briefly how the participatory budget process would work?
Okay, let us respond to those two. One, how do we center? What does it mean to center the sovereignty?
Well, first of all, to give people the powers which they do not know how. One of which is to recall members of parliament or who they elect who are not performing in accordance with either their promises or in the people's interest, to be able to end their term of office before the 5 years is up. That has been done in the country that we model ourselves on, in the colonial type constitution. The United Kingdom, they have now a right of recall by virtue of which constituents can call back their member of the House of Commons. We have it to some extent where the Parliament passed a law, the Local Governments Act, that in a municipality, not in a local government normal, but in a municipality like Portmore, the people can initiate a process to call back the mayor. So they passed it for that, but not for themselves. So that's one of the areas that we need to focus on. It's in Belize, it's in other countries where the people's sovereignty allows them, by virtue of a process, to recall those who are charged with the responsibility of making laws for the peace, order, and good government. That's just one thought.
Okay, Tracy, I think you had mentioned something about the 3 mechanisms.
Yes, and I think others have mentioned, Rosalie has also mentioned, so...
It's on, I think it's on. Let's do it. Let's start now.
Sure. I would want to emphasize...
Let's put it...
Closer?
Yeah.
All right. Process. Process matters if you are centering the sovereignty of the people. And I think that's very much what is at stake right now. In other words, we have to imagine, and I didn't have access to the terms of reference, but I have seen the CRC's terms of reference through access to information, I think which Suzanne Goff may have managed to secure. But the fact that we go through access to information, which is an important mechanism designed to facilitate us knowing, is, I think, a way in which this process needs to be recentered. The sharing of documents, I think there must be something which helps people to understand where are we starting, what are the questions that has to be offered by the Commission. So I think the process itself has to center people. I'd be interested in a process that uses the word democracy. It's one thing to talk about the consensus between the political parties, but we have to be deeply interested in a process that wants to strengthen democracy. I would like that to become part of the terms of reference, the way in which, as Jeanette says, as we adjust, as we encourage adjustment, those are important ways. Many substantive things, but I want to start today with process.
Process. Thank you. Rosalie, they had asked you particular about the participatory budget.
Yes.
If you could say a little more about that.
There are several ways to do it. One way is simply to agree on a share of the budget that the people decide directly. So, for example, we could say 1% of the budget, and that that's something that people decide how they want to spend. Remember, it is our money, right? So that's, and for example, it could be shaped in such a way as providing a framework in which the funding try to address specific challenges that we have. For example, crime. And it could be allocated in some of the key areas, communities where there is a crime problem, and we could say, how would you solve this money to fix the crime problem? But the mechanism would be done in such a way. And it's several models. One of the things Jamaicans should know is that some of these things can be done through ordinary legislation. But importantly, something like participatory budgeting that really gets to the heart of the money required to solve problems is embedded in the constitutions of at least 4 countries across the world. And so you can put it in your constitution, as some countries have. We can put it in ordinary legislation, and we can also create a policy framework. Those are all mechanisms. Again, it's what the Jamaican people want.
Good. Let me go back to the in-house participants. Who was there?
We just have one more online, if I could ask it.
Yes. I'm coming upstairs. Jerry, you want them to answer whether they were satisfied. Jerry, let me talk to them, man. You know, you and I have had this. Let me talk. Are you saying that they must give a statement on whether they were happy with their answer? Is it that you're asking? Okay. All right, good. David?
Satisfied with the way you answer. Who government govern, who are what? Who are what government govern?
Jerry, we're satisfied with the answer.
What, who you say government govern?
We are.
Jerry.
Who you say government govern?
All of us here.
Govern who?
All of us.
Govern them right.
I don't.
Government can't govern them, my people. They're going to sit up and Jamaica.
Yeah, Jerry.
Government is a service, not a raw scholarship. Service. No govern we. You govern procedures. That's what you govern, procedures. Like what policeman govern traffic. You know, govern we.
So Jerry, since me govern right here, so no, that's calm. David.
Good evening, everybody. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
David, go ahead.
I would like to submit that given the constitution we had, the limited, incomplete constitution we had that came in the 60s, that if we had followed that in word, in spirit, in the sense that it was meant, and in the objectives, we wouldn't have a utopian country now. We wouldn't have an idyllic country, but we'd have a country that the issues that are there, the prevalent issues, would not be to the extent that they are. And we would be able to basically say to the king, goodbye, and just go along. I think to a great extent that is what Barbados has done, because they are in a situation where they have issues, but the issues they have don't compare with our issues. And the question I would like to ask or pose is, when we are focusing on this new constitution, how are we also going to not lose sight of the issues that are there, that have developed from early days in our political history, way back in the 60s and so on, that have almost enveloped us now? And how are we going to still realize that that is something we have to deal with, and that the Constitution itself, although it certainly will help in some ways, it won't get to the core of the problem unless we decide to do that and do it.
All right, thanks,
in a way.
thanks,
So
yeah,
that's my
thanks,
question.
David. Who's the next person in line? Oh, okay, Prof.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am deeply concerned I am deeply concerned that the process that I see going on will mess up this situation. Number one, if it is a matter of just the government and the opposition agreeing in a committee and then trying to put it to the people, I can't see that working. It has started in total confusion because I don't see any history to it. I don't see any comparative thing to it. I don't see any principle behind it. So let me just tell you what I'm saying. And
Remember the question, doing that?
Yes, please, allow me. I'm going to take off from what Professor Robinson just said, that she would like to see the thing centered in democracy. And if we take it from that point of view, we are telling the wrong story. Because what we have to credit the British for is the electoral system of holding elections according to law and by processes. That is the legacy of the British. When it comes to democracy, democracy is an accomplishment of the Jamaican people, mainly of African ancestry, in which case, when you come to talk about it, you cannot get past 1944 universal adult suffrage, brought about under the leadership of the two people that the people trusted from 1938, Norman Manley and Sir Alexander Bustamante. And Jamaica, Professor Monroe, you are the expert on this, but Jamaica has always had constitutions. Always had constitutions. The constitutions were never the constitution of the people. The one from 90 is the only one that we began to put an input in. And let me say this too. In 1979, the People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party signed a memorandum of understanding, entered at the same time that they were establishing the mechanism for the electoral machinery. They signed it, that we were going to have a republic. It has failed every time on one question, referendum. Hear me. We have to have something to go to the people with. But if we go to the people with a cock and bull story, the reason why we have to remove them, leave the British monarchy is not anything to do with Britain. It has all to do with us. It has to do with the fact that we must finally understand that we as a people do not have an external benefactor who is on our behalf, that we are responsible for ourselves. The British monarchy,
we have to stop
the British monarchy, we have to understand that we have also, since 1962, produce Jamaicans who have been governors general that belong to us and have represented the best of any monarchy in the world. And we have to credit it in that story.
Okay, so, all right, listen, friends. I'm not sure how many of us were here at the beginning. And I described my role as both simple and hard. I got through what I thought was hard very easily. I never envisioned that this part would get this hard. I am appealing to you, don't make the rest of my minutes here any harder. Now, there are about 5 persons left. 6. I am going to reorder the line. Those who have not yet asked will be prioritized. That's the first thing. I think we have one more question from our online persons. I'm going to appeal to the panelists to answer crisply and succinctly. I did say we will never solve this issue this evening. We have to just start to fan the flame, and hope it will go to the kitchen tables. And it will go to some of the places that the church don't go often enough, but it will go all over. So let me take 3 at least here. Those, no,
Here?
Taking you now.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. My question is going to go completely south or east of all of the discussions here. I am thinking that we are, in haste. And we have artificial intelligence that is capable of getting information from everywhere, all the time, all at once, from all sources. My question is, would the advocates have a conversation with the Constitution Reform Committees to see if there is a way to get AI to help to consolidate information from the views and opinions of the small man, plus the legal minds, combined with the constitutional reform document, and somehow simplify and generate some answers very quickly. We're talking about 4 minutes here. We're talking about 10 minutes here. If the prompts are correctly and succinctly asked by the legal minds that we have here, we have the ability to get information out very quickly. So we can ask, for example, AI to take the constitutional reform document and break it down into simple arguments that the average Jamaican can understand, get the newspapers to throw it out, and just on social media and responses.
Good, thank you. That's a question. I'm sorry I'm not a panelist to answer that question for you. AI can't speak Jamaican. What's the? Don't let's take the question from the online.
What would you consider to be, this is for Professor Tracy, what would you consider to be the most beneficial transitional arrangements? Orders in council moving from monarchy to republic.
Did you hear that, Professor Tracy? You got it? Because I didn't get it, so please hold on to that question. That is yours. Yes, ma'am.
Good night, everyone. Good evening. My question, I have a question and I'd like to make a recommendation. My question is going off what Professor Monroe just said about the bill. And then there was also the issue of access to information, and we heard that Susan Goff was able to get the terms of reference of the committee. In other words, things have been secret. And so access to information. My question is, what is in the bill? Are we able to use access to information to determine what is in this bill that must be rushed through Parliament in 2 weeks? I'd like to propose that this is an important symposium, and there are certain circles when you have symposium that you end up with a resolution coming from the floor. I would like to recommend to the Jamaica Council of Churches as you go through that the Bethel Baptist Church resolution would be that coming from everybody in the room, may we have an access to information on what is contained in this bill before it reaches Parliament. Thank you.
Good, good.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I must say I was born in the Republic of Ghana, so I share with you something from Ghana. Following attaining Republican state in 1960, Ghana moved on to do something that some may consider to be trivial, but yet with a very significant implication. And that was moving away from the colonial or British way of driving on the left lane to driving on the right lane. It was done not only for that, but to also help align more with our Francophone neighbors to promote safety in driving, and also to improve or to boost intra-regional trade and commerce. And that was very significant. That is not my question, however. My question is this. We do have a group of people who believe that, and I use believe, they think and they do believe that having elected members to Parliament, those honorable men and women become their heart and mind. And rightly so to a point. They have placed such a trust in them to do and act in ways that will augur for their well-being and for generations to come. Of course, we know we know that some of these members have taken advantage of that position. Yes. It has been clearly posited here that moving away from the monarchy to Republican is not just that, but it has to do with the overall constitution that will work well to determine the quality of life for Jamaicans. How will we reach these people to change their mindset, to know that they need to participate in the process because it is more than so?
Okay, good. I got that question. There's a gentleman in the line who has not asked the question as yet. Yes, you. And you are the last one for now. And then I'll assess whether we have any more time.
Yes, greetings and my respects. There's 3 questions I have really.
3?
Yeah, them right down. They're going to be quick. I'm not going to give us.
But you say 1 in 3 parts.
1 in 3 parts. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. The first thing is the government within their legal right, constitutionally, to hold the whole constitutional issue within that secrecy? That's the first one. Meaning that as far as the legal process in which they're going through, is it constitutionally permitted? Am I clear on that question? Okay, cool. The second one is, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. The second question is for this honorable panel here. Is there any plans to propose an alternative? In other words, they are writing something to propose to the people. Are the people writing something to propose to them? And that's not the vote, because the vote is only a yes or a no.
No, don't answer that.
Okay, sorry. My lord, sorry.
Yes.
And the last part of the question is there any efforts to organize the dissemination of all the information that you come to the general public?
Okay, beautiful.
Okay,
thank you. Let's just deal with this round of questions. I want to give the one about AI to Chrissy and so forth. I thought I answered it, but still you could say, I think the heart of it is, how do we reach the masses in simple, understandable language? And you're a TikTok generation and so forth. So how, that's what I heard being asked.
we need to understand how people communicate. We need to know and we need to have the conversation with people. We know that young people think differently, they talk differently, they walk differently. Totally different from what happened when even in 1962. We know that the conversation of young people are different, even our adults. So we have to ensure that whatever we do, it doesn't fly over the heads, but we go to the channels and use the means and the mediums that people are using. So text messaging, the TikToks, the YouTubes, the pamphlets, yes, books, collection of important questions and answers, collect everything and ensure that it is communicated and distributed on a level. It will cost, but it is a good cost. It is something that is worthwhile for all our futures and for the future generation to come.
Good. There was a specific question to you, Tracy. Do you remember it? Because I have forgotten it, but I know they singled you out.
Yes, the question, it feels very, yes, the question was about transitional provisions.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm speaking in the mic, and
Not enough.
hopefully it will be louder.
Louder. Put it closer to your mouth.
I can't eat it, unfortunately.
No. Let's.
Another one.
I think what is happening is that, understandably, you use the microphone analogy. They can't keep it all on at the same time. It's with feedback. So I think once you pick up the mic, it takes a little while to just.
Yes.
Good. It's all right now.
Good. So the question was, what would be good? What kind of transitional provisions would be helpful? And my guess is the first stage being contemplated by the CRC will require some provisions to take us between the old and the new. And frankly, most constitutional reforms, which are significant, do. So the most important thing, I think, given our history, and the history is that we had transitional provisions which never ended. So Trevor knows the story. We introduced savings law clauses that stymied the development of our constitutions over 50 years. And even though there may have been an expectation by some in the secret room that it was really meant to be for a short period of time, these continued forever. There were amendments in 2011 which reintroduced them without the conversation about them being transitional at all. So what's important? Temporary. That we imagine that transition is important but must be temporary. It must be finite. That we be reluctant to introduce in our constitutions provisions which undermine the whole purpose of the Constitution through the idea of transition by saving laws which we know don't make us any freer, maintain the oppression which we have had for centuries.
Good. Thank you so much. Trevor?
Yeah, I want to start with the question that was raised. Is the government within its legal right?
Yes.
This is fundamental. It not only is the government within their legal right, but nothing can change substantially unless the two parties, this is the prison we were put in 1962, unless these two parties agree that they can put something to the parliament, the two-party leaders, which the parliament will then pass by a particular majority, there can be no referendum, because that is the road to the referendum. It has to go through the leadership of the two parties. Therefore, what we have to concentrate on in the short run is getting a groundswell to ensure that that bill is what we would like to see, and therefore we have to see it. Secondly, a commitment that after that Republican vote, which many of us feel is not substantial enough, and I can understand why, that there will be further changes that are going to empower the people and reduce what really is, honestly, as they put it in, and I quote it in my book, the executive dictatorship, the prime ministerial dictatorship over each 5 years. So I think we have to be careful that we don't do what happened in 1962 when people were, talking about all kinds of things they want to say. And while they're talking outside about what they want to see, the people in the room are taking decisions, and then they accommodate you coming to them in the 10th meeting after the decisions have been taken to say, yes, that sounds good, that sounds good. Horse gone through the gate already. So we have to be very careful to link our groundswell to the specific timetable of those 15 people that are going to meet. Today is Tuesday, they're going to meet tomorrow. So I want to say to them, when you're meeting tomorrow, open up, take a decision that from here on, you're going to be live, streaming all your meetings. Take a decision that tomorrow that will happen. And then that will allow us, the people, to link directly into what they are saying and thinking and get in that groundswell. Whether we use the petition mechanism which exists, or we're going to use other mechanisms, but it has to link with Golding and Holness have to agree on what they're going to be putting before the Parliament, and we have to influence that so that what goes before the Parliament in terms of the Republic in the first instance is followed by other substantial empowerment mechanisms that would then ensure that the democracy process is deepened beyond what we have now.
Good. Listen, friends, it's just about near 9 now. We are going to now be landing this first conversation. We can't open up to any new questions. I did say to the brother from Westmoreland that I will ensure that the JCC principals have a conversation with you this evening. That I will guarantee you this evening. I can't promise you for tomorrow, but this evening they will meet with you to agree. And friends, but I think, yes, you didn't understand. The good thing is that we'll not all be running away from here this evening. So if there's something you did not grasp, because I'm trying now to just gather up some of the sentiments that have been expressed. I liked the idea about a kind of Bethel Accord coming out. You said resolution. Something to say that the people, certainly in this session, this is what we have been hearing. And let me tell you a few things that I think we have been saying. I think one, we are saying we are grateful that there is some intentionality in re-scripting our Constitution, which ought to give an expression as to who we are as a people and how we want to be governed. Would you say that is? Don't just say yes because I say it. I mean, did you hear that? That we really want a new script which will reflect who we are as Jamaicans and how we think Jamaica should be organized as Jamaicans. The process that is being suggested now, however, does not seem to have within it the capacity to achieve that. It seems the time is too short to get the kind of engagement from the as wide a cross-section of Jamaica as possible. Did we say that? Did we say that? What I'm not sure is this groundswell. How do we move from those aspirations, those ideals now, to really get the change? I think Jeanette, you said you are an eternal optimist. And you say that you believe that, and Trevor backed you up, that the political directorate will respond to public pressure. That's what I hear you say.
Has been, and I believe will.
And therefore, I think we have to find a way, and the JCC is just one vehicle, find a way to get the conversations going a little faster and much wider. Do I hear that? Beautiful. Beautiful. We can't stop this evening. And everything can be solved by this panel. A lot of it will be in our hands. We, the church, facilitated this. Many of us here are Christians who are located in all sorts of spaces. There are pastors here. Let us play our part in getting the conversation going. I see you're determined. Yes, but I just try to summarize what will be the ingredients. What?
Live stream.
Use the mic so those online can hear.
Yes, I'm saying the General Secretary is taking all of those notes. Those will be in the accord. Good. For those who are online, I mean, what the speaker was encouraging us to do is to include in this accord, coming from our conversation this evening, the fact that we would like to send a direct message to the committee that there needs to be openness and transparency and access to their deliberations and to yes, with immediate effect. What I don't hear anybody saying yet is that count me in to join a protest at the place of their meeting tomorrow. I never heard that, but then the Archbishop is here and the Gen-Sec is here, President and the General Secretary. I can't commit the council, but I just wondered if you were saying something like that. Friends, it's been an evening, I think, well spent. I think we have tried to wrestle with it. It's a start of the continuation of a conversation. I would like, on your behalf, to thank our panelists and ask you to express our gratitude to them with an applause. And to thank you for your cooperation and invite now the General Secretary to give the official vote of thanks.
Sisters and brothers, I think the first item on the list of things to thank or persons to thank is our moderator, Reverend Carl Baldwin Johnson. Let us please give him a really rousing round of applause. Thank you, Carl, for your everything that you gave. I think the panelists did a few things and said some things that I would very briefly like to summarize, and then we'll get to the resolutions. The most significant feature of the Constitution is that it belongs to the people. Tracy Robinson. The colonial approach will not work. Trevor Monroe. The Republic is what we create. Rosalie Hamilton. And Jamaica is waiting on the citizens. Jeanette Calder. Let's give them a big, rousing round of applause for their presentations. We want to thank the 322 persons who joined on the YouTube channel, some of whom asked questions which we could not present. And then finally, I'd like to use the opportunity, as we have on our agenda, what's the next step? I've never been to an engagement like this where the audience demanded a resolution. So let us present the two resolutions for your action. Whereas the participants of the conversation on the Constitution have unanimously agreed that transparency and full participation are imperative for the success of the present constitutional reform process, be it resolved that the Jamaica Council of Churches conveys by whatever means the demand that the people see and interrogate the bill for transition of our governance arrangements before it is presented to Parliament. All in favor say aye. And whereas there is need for the rescripting of the narrative concerning our governance arrangements, be it resolved that the processes and deliberations of the CRC be fully publicized and made available to the people for their scrutiny. All in favor say aye. With immediate effect. Yes, an amendment to the resolution.
That they have to apprise themselves of all the consensus issues that have been arrived at from the 70s to the 90s. But what they don't probably recognize that we, the people of Jamaica, need to know about those same issues. So we are asking you also to, what we would like them to do also is to publicize those
the previous
issues
deliberations
of consensus that they are acquainting themselves with the people of Jamaica also.
Yes, go ahead, please, Prof.
The documents which they have used to brief themselves on what has happened in the last 30 years, those need to be simplified and made available immediately to the people. Publicized by all means.
Yes. Can you hear what he's saying? David, come use the mic, please. Drafting. Drafting stage. Yeah, man. Drafting stage.
I was just saying that I think it's important also to include that while the constitutional focus is going on, that the country does not and the leadership does not forget about the critical issues that cannot be put in the back burner while focus is going on in the Constitution.
Such as?
Such as crime.
Okay.
And getting into the, I mean, and there are others, but crime is the main one. Getting into the real core initiators of how the crime started and trying to find a way. Professor Monroe mentioned the whole thing about collaborating on a different issue in terms of the Constitution, but that is also needed in terms of the crime. And I'm saying that I think we cannot forget those aspects. We can't allow ourselves to go on with this state of crime in the country.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to sit down, President, tomorrow and sort out these two resolutions properly. 3. I have 2. Oh, no, that was an amendment. That was an amendment to the second one. Thank you very much. Sisters and brothers, yes, Professor Herald, real quick, only 20 seconds.
That we restrict this aspect of of constitutional reform to one subject, that of replacing the British monarch with our own. If we tie to everything, it will kill it. Make that be the one issue that we're dealing with, we're doing through the courts.
Well, one at a time.
The court, listen, the court, we have to leave the Privy Council and go to a thing. But that does not require a referendum. It can be done in the parliament.
Got you. Got you. Thank you.
We shouldn't link the two, because if you put that, you will kill it.
Right. Got you. All right, friends. I have only one thing left to do. It is my view that 90% of Jesus' pronouncements on this idea of the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God had something to do with right here on earth. If that is true, which I believe it is, my count of Jesus' statements in the Gospels, if that is true, then it means the church has a mandate, a responsibility, a duty to take up the issues of right here on earth and bring them into the state and condition that human beings can flourish. In fact, did not Jesus say to us, when you pray, say, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you very much for engaging in the process of bringing the kingdom of God here on earth through our participation in the process of democracy. May we stand and receive the blessing. Archbishop, could you please provide that for us?
We give you thanks, Almighty God, for gathering this evening. We thank you for the meeting of minds, the sharing of ideas. We pray, Lord, that what has begun this evening indeed is an indication of the inspiration that comes from you, because you have created us in your own image and likeness. And you created us, Lord, and provided us with resources with which we safeguard the integrity of our well-being and well-being of others. So may your Holy Spirit now abide with us to direct us, grant us clarity of mind, grant us a spirit of urgency and commitment in the way forward. And we ask that your Holy Spirit will go forth to touch the hearts and the minds of those who are integral to this process, especially the current CRC members, but indeed every member, every citizen of this nation, because this is our Constitution. It is for our well-being and for our advancement. Hear, Lord, our prayer, and grant you this blessing in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
We're going to ask the panelists to mingle for a minute, and then we'll ask them to retire for 5 minutes for a little post-symposium engagement. So please, if you feel free to engage them and speak to them and address your specifics. And JCC leadership, please join the panelists. We need to have a quick talk.